Hi, so glad you're here this morning. I'm Jessica Guernsey. My job title is actually Crusher of Dreams. I am a slush pile reader, so it's kind of fun to be on a panel with editors and see a little bit of different aspect of the same side of the same coin. So I'm going to have each of our lovely panelists introduce themselves and what their specialties are. Emma, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I'm the managing editor at Future House Publishing, and it's a pretty small publisher, so I get to wear a lot of hats. I am involved in acquisitions and content editing, and then I manage our copy editors and proofreaders.
Awesome. Okay. And Kaela, how about you?
Hi, I am the debut author of Suzy Bills and the Desert of Souls. It comes out April 13th. And when I'm not creating fantastical stories, I am a content editor at a marketing company, which I dearly also love. So I do a lot of copy editing in that field as well.
Fantastic. Kristy.
I am Kristy S. Gilbert from Loose Leaf Editorial and Production. I'm an independent book editor and designer. I've been doing that for about a decade. And I kind of run the gamut. I fill the gaps wherever people need in their publishing team. So sometimes I do developmental type edits, and I do everything through the copy editing and proofreading and book design.
Wow. Okay. Oh, wow. Awesome. And last but most definitely not least, Suzy Bills.
Hi, I am a teaching professor at BYU in editing and publishing. I've been editing for about 17 years, mostly substantive and copy editing, but I also do some developmental editing as well. And my second book on freelance editing is coming out this fall from University of California Press.
Oh, fantastic.
Wait, what's it called, Suzy?
It's called the Freelance Editor's Handbook.
Perfect.
Okay, and when was it coming out?
It's coming out fall of this year, so it's September-ish.
September-ish. Okay. All right. Good one to look for. Okay. All right. Let's pretend I am a brand new author. Well, I am, but and I just finished this amazing manuscript that is perfect. I just typed the end 5 minutes ago, so it's absolutely ready to publish, right? No, it's not. Okay, so we're going to talk about the different edits that I'm going to need to go through to have the best possible book. Okay, I'm going to kind of put you guys on the spot a little bit, but I warned you ahead of time that was going to happen. So, all right, we're going to start with Emma. Emma, brand spanking manuscript. What's the first edit I should do?
So you want to start as big picture as possible and then work your way down. So you're going to start with overarching plot and character arcs.
Okay, so a plot edit or, so like a character edit. So I'm going to make sure my characters have an arc. Okay.
And that you have a single cohesive storyline going through the whole manuscript.
All right. Okay. And then, okay. So Kaela, what do I got to do next? After my characters are solid, what comes next?
Well, once everything's like sweet with that full storyline, it's time for line editing. And that is the stage where you're really looking at your images, if they're coming across, you're looking at your paragraphs and the way that your prose flow, you're looking at sentence structure to make sure that it's easy to read, it's understandable, and, not just easy to read and understandable, but also conveying what you want it to, like really coming across to the reader. That's when you're like, you know what, I'm sorry, but I really do not understand what this character looks like somehow from this description. That's when you're tackling that and a few other kind of things like that.
Okay. Okay, awesome. All right, now someone told me I need a developmental edit. Kristy, what is a developmental edit? How is that going to help me?
So a developmental edit means that there are big chunks of your, large scale chunks of your book that just aren't quite working. Maybe your climactic scenes aren't landing, and that might be because the climactic scene is broken, but it might also be just because you don't set it up well enough early in the book. And an editor can help you identify some of those things. It can help you tell you when your climax isn't landing, when your characters aren't fully three-dimensional, if they're a little flat. It can help let you know when your pacing is off. Like maybe it's like action, 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 and then nothing happens for like 10 chapters. And then we're back to the action again, which, a break now and then from the action is awesome. But like a 10 chapter break is probably going to lose some of the readers that you hooked with all the action at the beginning. So usually if you get a developmental edit, you're going to make all those revisions. And then you really need someone to check to make sure that all those revisions landed. Because you've normally, like if you're building a bridge, if your book is a bridge, you've like redone some of the support systems and like repaved it. And so you got to check to make sure you did that well and that it runs smooth with the new revisions.
Okay. I'm sure whatever I write is going to be perfect. So I'm sure I won't have that.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, Suzy, I've graduated from English in high school. So surely I am perfect enough to be my own line editor, right?
Right. Well, and I would just say, I think even with developmental edits, I would say almost all books benefit from a developmental edit. And it's the same thing, even more so, I'd say, with a line edit and the other, if we're going to copy editing, proofreading, they're all really needed because we're so invested in our own writing. And so we miss some things that outside people are not going to catch. And, that definitely applies to the line editing phase of, even editors, we need that input from other people. So, I mentioned that my book is coming out this fall. So it went through, the review phase. I got feedback from the university. It went through copy editing. And so we all need to have that help from other perspectives because we can't see everything from our own perspective. Even people who read tons, you still, to be able to do a really good line edit, you need to have that training specifically and what that involves. Just, if you're copy editing, you need to know Chicago Manual of Style or whatever style you're using. And so you need to go through that training so you know what you know. Like, unless you know it, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Okay. Excellent. Kaela, since you also have a book coming out, can you talk to us a little bit about your editing process that you had to go through?
Yes. Okay. So to start out, I would say that it's really good to keep in mind the fact that when you're a writer and when you're an author, your initial drafts, like maybe even your first two, are for you. But when you enter revisions, it's about being understood by somebody else who's not you. And so that's what all of your edits are for, so that someone else can access and feel the same things that you were trying to get across. So when I was writing CC, I'm a very quick drafter, so I actually got it done very quickly. I had it ready for agents fairly quickly. But once we sold it to HarperCollins and I needed to go in there, boy, were there some heavy edits. Some of that was because we were changing it from a young adult to a middle grade. Which was its own beastly revision process. But some of it was just chopping it down because it was too long and getting more things done in the same scene that like, this really doesn't need to be 2 chapters. This can be the same chapter. We just need to get both of those things happening in it. And then I moved on to more developmental, like the typical developmental edits when you're not changing age group. And those ones were a lot about world building. They were making sure that all of the character arcs were coming across that I wanted to. They were making sure that the timeline was consistent because I'm definitely bad at that one particularly. I was like, there has been 3 Fridays, but it's all supposed to be happening in a week. So that's a problem. And so that's consistency, character arcs, setting, world building. And since we're, an LTUE, keep in mind, you are going to probably need to have your own like big world building revision most of the time. Like maybe if you're a plotter and you've outlined everything, it's going to be a little bit easier. But even then, you're going to have to make sure you have an info dumped in like big places or forgotten to put something really important in. And after that point, that's when we moved to line edits. And that's when it was looking at like the implications. Like sometimes you don't even think about that. Like you think sentence level, is the sentence readable? But sometimes it's about the implications you're creating with some of your description or some of your paragraphs, like dwelling so long on something that you're like, is this going to be really important? It feels like it's going to be really important. And then it's not important. Yes. So you're trying to stop misleading the reader as well, and draw them in where you want to draw them in. Like, yes, it is important that this character has multicolored hair and has mismatched eyebrows, or like all these different kinds of things. It's all about making that understood and making the prose themselves enjoyable as well, for the age group and the genre that you intend. And then we moved on to copy edits, glorious copy edits. And that's when I was looking at those yummy commas. I was looking at that punctuation. And some of it was even like spelling, because my book, of course, takes place in a Mexican fantasy. And I'm not fluent Spanish speaker, unfortunately. I'm working on it. My abuela would be very happy if I did. But some of that was checking to make sure that I was spelling some of the Spanish correctly and researching more in depth, which my copy editor was fantastic and did a wonderful job. She was also Venezuelan, so she could really lean in on that. And I was so grateful, like for spellings for things that, in being Mexican American, I thought it was spelled this way, but it typically is spelled this way, things like that. So there's all kinds of things that you won't even expect, but it's really important to be dedicated to the revision process and every part of the revision process, even when you get down to the proofs and you have read your book so many times that you actually start to get a little sick of it. I didn't believe people when they said that, but by the time I hit the proof, I was like, I know. CC does this and then she does this. But like being dedicated to that process and loving your story enough is what will get you through all of that and make it something that someone else can access to.
Awesome. Wow. Thanks. Okay. Now this question's a little free for all. What is your favorite part of the editing process? What do you like to see the best in the manuscript that you're working on?
That's a really good question.
Are you talking about the phase, like, developmental, or is that what you're asking?
Yeah, whatever you want. What is your favorite part of the editing process?
Oh, I don't do nearly as many line edits as I'd like. I don't know that they're my favorite, but I think they're the one I get hired for the least, proportionate to how many I want to do. I do a lot of manuscript evaluations, which aren't as in-depth as a full developmental edit, but it looks at a lot of the same parts of a book. So I do lots of those, and I do lots of copy editing and proofreading, and I don't get to do nearly as much line editing as I'd like, because I really like helping people finesse their prose, not just like correct their errors and get rid of weird echoes, which is like the copy editing stuff, but like really making the prose beautiful and helping the best imagery that the author comes up with, helping that stand out and not get bogged down in too much other stuff. I think that's fun.
Going along with what Kristy said, I do a lot of substantive. I call it substantive. It's pretty equivalent to line editing. And that's really what I like the best, because I really do get to dig in deep and say, okay, I see the idea you're trying to get across. Let's actually get that across really nicely. And so people understand it and they're inspired by it. And so it bugs me a little bit if I'm just copy editing and say, oh, we could really improve just this whole idea, how it's presented. But I'm just doing the copy. So I like the digging in deep with the substantive or line editing.
Funny, line editing is my favorite part too. During developmental editing, you kind of have to be like, ooh, this whole chapter has to go, let's write something completely new. And the author's kind of sitting there brainstorming, and it can be this big emotional struggle, and just everything is so fluid and so changeable. And then that kind of stage ends and you get to the sub edits, and it's like, okay, like we know what happens, we know what everyone feels, now we just have to like translate that onto the page. And so it's less like destructive and rebuilding things from scratch, and it's more like taking what's already on the page, and you get to play around with that and make sure that everything has the right emphasis and things. So that stage gets to be really fun.
Okay, awesome. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Kaela, did you have something else you wanted to say? Suzy?
Oh yeah, sorry. Some of those little there's a little bit of a delay. I'll just say real quick, substantive or developmental editing is probably my favorite and least favorite stage at the same time, because I particularly love helping other people in that stage, because everything's so fluid and it's an embryo and you're like, oh, the potential. But when it's mine, I'm suddenly like, too messy, too big. But once I get through that, my favorite part for my own books is probably line editing, because I love cleaning up those imagery and making sure that they're conveying exactly what I want it to. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
So I just wanted to point out, Suzy talked about how if she gets a copy edit and she wants to line edit it, but she doesn't, that's actually really important. And all of us do that, where you divide what kind of edit you're doing. And because once you get to the copy editing stage, like, it's probably too late to be making big changes that need as much input and review that line edits do. And so just in the publishing process, it's important to go in order. If you get to the copy edit and discover like a huge developmental issue, that, like, if you take the time to fix it, you're going to be pushing back all sorts of deadlines. You're going to have to redo a bunch of copy editing. And if you don't, then you just have to let that thing sit, which is sometimes fine. It's sometimes fine to be like, you know what? We have to just accept that it's the best that we could make it in the time that we had. And that's fine. Because nothing's ever going to be absolutely perfect. But it's important not to try to expect developmental feedback at a copy editing stage, because that's not what should be happening then. I've done that occasionally, like given developmental feedback at the copy editing stage, but it's normally like, I found something that was hugely unintentionally but massively racist. And like, you got to fix that before you go to press. You just have to. And that, because that's actually harmful to people. But if it's just like, yeah, it turns out this character is actually still kind of flat. Well, you might just have a sort of flat character when you go to press. And that might not be the worst thing ever.
Just to go along with that, and I think that's one of the reasons why it really is important to do those other phases. I think sometimes, especially newer authors, they think, oh, well, I just need a copy edit, or sometimes they'll say a proofread, and I'm good. You really should go through those other phases to catch those other things. And if you're not going to do a developmental phase, then make sure that you have beta readers, that you're in a writer's group, that you're getting feedback from other people so that you can catch some of those things and address them. But it really is important, to get the book to be as good as it can and to be really engaging for your readers. You do want to go through those other processes. I know it can be expensive. So if you don't have the funds for all the phases, then make sure you are getting that feedback from someone, friends, family, beta readers, whoever, so that you really can address those things, because otherwise they will be noticed in the copy edit. But like Kristy said, it might just be too late to address those things.
One thing about using like beta readers in a writing group versus like editors, you have to remember editors are trained in like specific genres and are going to be noticing things like she was talking about changing a book from YA to middle grade, and beta readers might not have as strong of a line of like, oh, is this a YA thing? Is this a middle grade? What kind of changes do you have to make to make your novel one or the other? And so if you're using a writing group or you're using beta readers instead of developmental edit, aside from just them being an outside perspective, which is super useful and definitely something you need, you also want to make sure you're picking somebody who knows the genre and the age range that you're going for and is going to catch things that are not right for those parts of your book, even if they work plot-wise.
I would even add on to that and say, like, part of becoming a better writer is learning how to incorporate feedback. And of course, I mean, learning to take critique. We've probably heard that a lot because it's very important. But also, like, when you learning when beta readers or an editor comes to you and says, this seems to be a problem, this might fix it. Usually editors and beta readers and critique partners are going to be wrong about how to fix it. Like that's just true. And I say that as an editor, like my writers blow me out of the water all the time when I was like, how about this? And they're like, how about this? And I'm like, oh, that's so much better. You know? But learning how to what they're best for is telling you that there is some problem. They may even identify what the problem is wrong. Like they're like, that just really feels like she doesn't have much support in this. Like, and I don't know how she's able to do this. You're like, they're like, what if you make another teen friend for her? And you're like, I don't think that's gonna work because of reasons. But then you're like, wait, what she really needs is a mentor. That's gonna solve all of the problems, and it'll solve these other problems over here too. You know, the more problems you can solve in one fix, the better. But yeah, learning, that's going to take time. So be patient with yourself as you develop that skill too. But that's also part of learning to self-edit yourself. That is a really important step. You need editors, you need outside beta readers, but also you should be learning from all the things that they tell you so that you can self-edit and like revise on your own better and better every time. That's part of developing craft, I think. It's not talked about that much, but I think it's important.
It's very important. When I encounter like new writers who they're like, I just finished my first manuscript and I want to hire you for developmental editing, I don't let them, because developmental editing is way too expensive for them to spend that money on me going through their manuscript 2 or 3 times, giving them my expert feedback when they don't have the skill set to use that feedback. It's like paying for a really expensive car when you don't know how to drive. That's not smart. So I'll recommend newer writers get a manuscript evaluation where they can get lots of feedback, and I give them lots of tools for learning self-editing. But if they haven't worked a lot with a writing group or gotten feedback and learned how to use it, then I don't even let people pay me to developmental edit. As much as I like money, like I would feel bad taking it.
All right, let's actually talk about that a little bit more, Kristy. So what is the difference between just a manuscript evaluation and a developmental edit?
So both of those things are going to be a little different depending on the editor. So I'm going to tell you what those look like for me, but each editor is a little bit different. So for a manuscript evaluation, I read through the manuscript one time, making notes for myself as I go, and then I write an editorial letter. I don't mark up the manuscript very much at all. And then I write, the letters are normally 8-page minimum for a novel. And I've written letters that are up to 20 pages long, where it's feedback on like, you know, your characters are flat. Here are some exercises you can do to try to figure out how to flesh out your characters and work things out. And here are some examples with your specific characters. And I'll go through characters and plot and other things until I feel like I've given too much feedback. Often I don't give everything because I'm like, that's enough. And then I'll cut it off somewhere between 8 and 15-ish pages is normally when I stop providing feedback. But for a developmental edit, I read through once to get a feel for the entire story. And then I read through again, marking up every single chapter and scene with more feedback. And I'm going to write a letter about every chapter with like, does this chapter belong in this book? If it does, what do I think is broken? What do I think is awesome? Like what should stay, what should go? So I'm going through minimum 2 times on a developmental edit, and the volume of feedback is massively different because for the manuscript evaluation, it's just one letter that briefly goes over all the major issues, whereas a dev edit, I'm marking up the manuscript all the way throughout and giving feedback on every page, not just like broad strokes. This character doesn't have a strong desire to drive after or whatever. So that's what it is for me.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd say that like for anybody who's just very intimidated by listening to all of that, like that's actually really great stuff because every bit of that is going to help you. And like all like authors that I know agree, it's one of those things that you read through that and then you leave it like that letter alone for a while, your edit letter alone for a while, and like stew on it. And then you go to your manuscript to start those edits and things like that. Like that's not something you do all at once.
The first part of my editorial letter is how to use this letter. 1, read it. 2, go away. hate me if you need to. 3, come back and read it again.
Yeah, exactly.
You definitely have to schedule time to be angry. It's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. Be angry, be hurt, have that 3 bowls of ice cream. It's okay. And then
Yeah.
get to work, right?
Yeah, because it's true that it's its own stage as a writer when you get a massive amount of feedback and it's good, but you're still like boom, 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 because I definitely do that. I'm like, and my editor is a genius, But it's also again, coming back to that point of it's important to be committed to growing as a writer, or else you won't grow as a writer. That's just really true, because learning to not just, okay, well, I'll do what they said because they said to, but to know why, learn why what they said works, why it makes it better. Really commit yourself to that process, because it will improve your next book from the get-go. Because you're like, hey, I learned so much by revising my last book. That a lot of those things will start to be incorporated naturally as you write in the future, because they'll become a part of you.
Going along with what some of you just said or said earlier, you're not always going to agree with what the editor said. And that's okay. But think about what they said, and think about, just think about it. And you might say, okay, don't really agree with that, but I see something here that could be improved. And so your problem solving to figure out, okay, this is what I could actually do. And I will say, in the books I've written and just other things I've written and gotten feedback on, yeah, sometimes I just don't agree with it, but sometimes I say, okay, maybe I don't, but there are going to be enough people who will see things differently that I'm still going to go and revise. And there are also other times where I just say, no, I feel good. I feel really confident with how this already is, so I'm going to keep it. But I decide that after I've really thought things through and weighed all the options. I've talked to people to get their perspectives. And so whatever the case is, really think about it. It's fine to get other people's feedback and say, okay, what do you think about this? Here's what I'm thinking. And so really think everything through. And when you do, I think typically you will come to a much better final result when you've gone through that process and thought through really what is the best for each of these things.
And it could be you may not agree with what they said at the time, but their suggestions might be indicative of a different problem.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be that you need to strengthen your character arc in order to solve this other issue later on. So it's you definitely got to think about it. Food for thought, and really be mature and take a different perspective look at your manuscript. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to add about the differences between manuscript and developmental?
This is related to what we were talking about. But on my last panel, something that somebody said, which was, I think, really important to keep in mind during all of these revision processes, particularly the developmental, but all of it, is that it's important to learn to separate your writing, which is this beautiful thing that is very important to you, and your self-worth. Being able to separate those two things is what's going to be able to make you a better writer and a healthier and happier person. So take time to separate those things in your head. And that can be a process. It really can be for years, a year-long, multiple year-long process, but it's really worth it because you get the best of both worlds that way.
That's a really good point. Thank you. Has there ever been an instance where you've had to kind of sort of coach someone on how to handle the edit, to whatever level it might have been, to where they're not understanding the process of working through that edit?
I definitely have had that problem. We're a small publisher, so we work with a lot of pretty brand new authors. And I definitely have had authors that will just word for word insert my comments into the manuscript. And I'm like, I put it in a comment because that was a vague suggestion. That doesn't sound like your voice at all. And I knew that. I'm giving you hey, maybe something like this should go here, but I don't quite know what your character's motivation is. So, make sure to like word this in a way that fits what you actually want the character to be doing. And they just paste it directly in there. And then I have to be like, okay, now I got to edit my sentences and be like, that's not good either. Like, that's not how it works. And so I definitely have had to teach authors, like, feedback coming from me is not meant to replace your ability to write and like you putting the thought in and the attention into the story. I'm there to catch issues, be an outside perspective, but you as the author, it's your story, it's your words, and every single suggestion I make, even if it's an in-text change, you need to look at like every word that I've put in there and be like, okay, is this the word I want to use? Is there a different word, a different sentence structure that does these sort of things that solves this problem, and that's the way I want to do it? Or is there, a different reason this character is doing this thing, and that's the one that I was intending, and that's the one that I need to put on the page? You really have to take responsibility for your own book, and the editor's there to help, but like you have to like choose every decision, every edit that goes into the book, and make it your own.
It's a good point of pointing out like how writers should feel empowered. Like you can make a lot of decisions, and so even when you were working with an editor or things like that, realizing that you're actually at the wheel, they're more like your first mate. Or they're like, well, there's some rocks up there. You should probably not steer into that. And you're like, well, okay, but like you have to turn the wheel, because this is your story. And a good editor will always respect that and be like, no, this is your words, though. I'm telling you what some issues are. I'm telling you how to make it better. But this is still your story. I want you to be at the helm.
Sometimes in like just my initial email back to the author, or sometimes within the file, I will just make comments saying, I've added some suggestions just to kind of get your thoughts going of maybe how you want to revise, but like you probably have a better way to say this than I did. And so this is just to get you thinking. So I try to clarify that, saying, I know you can do it better than I am. I'm just giving you a little nudge of here's some place just to get you started.
Yeah, editors aren't here to rewrite your book for you. We would go write our own books if that's what we wanted to do. And some of us do, like, go write our own books. But but also I know that if I just say what a problem is and don't provide an example solution, sometimes authors don't understand what the problem is. So if an editor is providing a sample solution, don't take it as that's the only way to fix that problem. They're just trying to make sure you understand what the issue is and prime the pump for you to come up with your own solutions.
Exactly. They might say, this is the problem. You can fix it A, B, or C, but maybe you come up with D and it's your own idea, and that's how you want to fix it. So that's, excellent.
Yeah, as an editor, sometimes just pointing out a problem and you're like, hey, like this sentence is really unclear. Then the author's just like, okay, but like, what do I do with that, right? Like that can be really just like negative, and like it's really hard to like get the ball rolling. So as an editor, you learn to, okay, so here's sort of, moving forward, not just like here's what's wrong, but like we're fixing it. We're getting the ball rolling. And so that's kind of the purpose of us making suggestions, is to kind of move past that, like, ooh, this sucks, ooh, that hurts kind of stage of the critique and get into the like, okay, but we can fix this. Like, this is solvable. This is tackleable. We can handle this kind of a mindset.
Awesome. Okay. Now, Kristy had touched on this a little bit earlier, but I wanted to see if anyone else had a perspective on it. Is it ever too late to edit a manuscript? Is there ever a particular editing pass where it's just too late? You don't have time? No? We're always good?
It
can always
depends on what you're doing with a book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Emma.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so expound on that.
So if you are hiring freelance editors, you can get all the way to proofing. You can lay out your book and then you can look at it and go, you know what? Never mind. And you can go all the way back because it's yours and you have that authority and you haven't made promises to anyone. I mean, I wouldn't recommend it. Don't do that, but you can.
It costs a lot of money.
But if you're, signed with a publisher, like the publisher has deadlines, the publisher has promised this book, and at some point, they're just gonna have to be like, and we're releasing it. Like, the publisher's the one spending that money on those editors and those passes and printing the book and marketing the book. And so if you're not hitting those deadlines, you have people you're responsible to. And so you can't just sit there and dig your heels in and be like, no, we're making everything absolutely perfect, because you're now part of this, business partnership with other people, and you have to consider the time and money that they're spending on things, and sometimes you just can't go back anymore. It's too late.
Mm-hmm. I would emphasize again why what Kristy said about going in order with your edits is so important, is because of that, because there can reach a point where it's like, nope, sorry, too bad, it's over. Or sometimes, sorry, too bad, it's over, it's too late, is just you ran out of money because you were like, hey, let me pay a bunch of copy editors and a book formatter to get my book ready, maybe for self-publishing. And then it's like, no, I'm sorry, this needed a developmental edit. And your copy editor tells you that at the end. And you're like, well, crap, I don't have any more money for that. I have to go save up or something. Now, of course, you can always just not publish it yet and save some more and stuff like that. There's always that option. But it's painful to hit that point and then have to go back that heavily, because you're going to have to redo copy edits too after you do a developmental edit. And that's why I never put that before. A lot of people don't realize that editing is not just copy editing, especially when it comes to a book. Developmental, substantive, line editing, those all should come first. I even do that with my articles. To me, priority is getting everything, all of the big things in place, because it doesn't matter if your grammar is really nice if nobody understands what you're trying to say. So I would really suggest, please go in order. You save yourself so much time and money and effort, and it's okay if that's happened to you in the past, even. It's something to learn from, but give yourself the best chance.
Yeah.
And she brought up a good point about how, if you have already done copy edits and you go back and do developmental edits, you now have not done copy edits and you have to do those over again. If you do them in the wrong order, they don't count anymore. You have to start over, because you'll have entire new chapters or scenes or sentences that no longer have been read by these copy editors. And while you're doing developmental edits, you're going to make typos, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to introduce new errors into the book, and then have to do those things all over again. So you can't just pause, jump back, and then come right back where you were. You've started completely over now.
It could change your continuity, which copy editors also check for. So I'd also point out that once the book is formatted, that is when proofreading happens. Suzy alluded to this, that copy editing and proofreading are different, and not everyone knows that. Copy editing happens on your manuscript, and you have a lot more freedom to fix things at the copy editing when you're dealing with the manuscript. Once it's been formatted as a book, especially when it's been formatted for print, a typesetter has gone through every single page of that and every single line to check the hyphenation, to make sure the hyphenation doesn't trip up your reader, to check for word stacks, to make sure that chapters don't end with one line on the last page, because that looks ridiculous. And if you rewrite a paragraph, that could require them to not only redo that for that chapter, it could force them to redo all that work for all the following chapters. The effects can snowball at that point. So that proofreading is changing things that are embarrassingly broken, and that's all. And formatting errors. That's what proofreading is. It's not gonna fix if I think this word better conveys your tone. No, it's not time for that. It's time for you spelled fork with a Q. And that's it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. Let's go ahead and take some questions from the chat.
Okay, Sasha asked, should you get multiple passes of developmental edit, line edit, copy edit, or what about using multiple editors?
That's a good question. I'll tackle the first half of that. So at the very least. So I would recommend multiple passes for developmental edit. I think that should be at least 2 revisions probably on its own. Maybe you can do it in one, but I would, at the very least, when you're starting out, try to do as much of it as you can, because there's probably going to be more in developmental edits than you expect. That's been my experience, and I think that's most people's experience once they get a developmental edit. And that can mean, I think beta readers are fine for things like that too, but it also kind of depends on where you are as a writer. And that's that you don't need to feel bad wherever you are as a writer. Just acknowledging where you are is important so that you can take the proper steps to give yourself the best chance and empower yourself. So if you're a fairly new writer, again, like we were talking about earlier, you're probably going to have less skill or less practice even incorporating other people's feedback in a really strong way. So you're going to need, I would say, lots of practice. You're going to need lots of passes through your developmental edits and probably lots of feedback in order to help. And that will be good practice for you in the future as well. You probably need fewer the more experienced you are. But it also kind of depends on your book, because there have been authors who are very well experienced but had a really hard time writing a book and needed more people's thoughts and things like that in order to coagulate it and bring it all together. So it kind of depends. But I would say at the very least, get multiple passes on your developmental edit, I think. Now, line edits and copy edits are still very important. I do not mean to lessen their importance either. So especially if you're like, I think I'm a little weak in my line editing, get multiple passes of that too. And I would definitely say probably do at least 2 of your copy edits as well. Even just read-throughs of the book, even if you're doing it that way, just because copy edit levels is the things where you're like, you may miss something. And it really helps to get fresh eyes on a copy edit. So if you're going to do an editor or you're going to do a beta reader, just make sure one of you knows grammar and copy edit level stuff really well at that point, because it doesn't quite help if you've never cracked the Chicago manual style. It doesn't help for if you go through looking for grammar mistakes because you don't know the grammar that well, which is okay. You know, take those opportunities to grow too and assess yourself. Like, maybe I should buy the Chicago manual style 17th edition. And you should. It's great. I love it.
Good bedtime reading.
And if I could just add something in with that. So, there are lots of tools out there, whether it's just Word Spell Checker or ProWriting Aid, or, lots of ones that are billed as, hey, we will help you fix any grammar, any editing issues in your manuscripts. They can help, but they will actually introduce a lot of errors. They will suggest that you do things that are not good ideas. So there still is a lot of value in having a copy editor going through and correcting things. And I will just say, please, after you've received that copy edit back and you've gone through and maybe you've revised more, if you run word spell check, probably don't. Only accept the misspelled words, because I have so many times, I've edited something and the author goes through and then they send it back to me for another review. And they've implemented so many things that word spell check said that were wrong. And I just no, I did these things because I was fixing them. So just be careful to not just accept everything that Word or whatever program says, oh, you need to do this. Well, it can definitely help fix some typos, but also trust the copy editor. And that's one of the reasons it is really valuable to have a copy editor, because the copy editor will know what really is true and what really is just one of Word's crazy ideas.
Well, and sometimes tools like that can edit out your voice in problematic ways, because a lot of them are written to help you write efficiently. And efficiency is not the only standard by which to judge language. So sometimes if you do everything those automated tools tell you, just like you shouldn't do everything a human editor tells you to do, you should know why you're doing what you're doing and care about that. But to the note of hiring multiple editors, I would probably stick with the same editor for developmental edits unless you don't get along with them. If you have competing visions of the book, then definitely change editors. But probably stick with the same one for dev editing, multiple passes. Line editor, again, you can probably stick with the same person. When you get to copy edits and proofreads, you probably shouldn't be using the same person who did your dev edits and or line edits, because they've read your book too many times to have the fresh eyes and they know what you meant to say. So they won't, it's harder to notice. And I've done this myself. Like I've had clients who had me do developmental type of reviews or manuscript evaluations, and then they want me to do a copy edit. And I'm like, I can't. I'm the wrong person for this. Again, I love money, but I can't take this work from you because I can't do a good job anymore. I can do an okay job and I'll catch most of the things, but I won't catch as many as I would if I had never read this manuscript before, or as many as one of my fellow copy editors can do. And then proofread should probably be by someone who has never read the book before as well. For that same reason, like you need clean eyes on those tiny little minute errors. You got to have fresh eyes on those.
I'll say, even at my work at the marketing company, which is fabulous, by the way, like we make sure that all of the editors swap each other's work. Whenever the article that we've edited has gotten to the proofing stage, we swap it with another editor to make sure that we're all reading each other's stuff, which is cool. But that way, we all are bringing our fresh eyes to a proofread. That way, we try to avoid in every possible way having the editor who edited something proof it, because it's so much more difficult. You have looked at this piece for a very long time. You do know what the writer meant to say, and that does influence you. So yeah, there's just no replacement for fresh eyes. There just really isn't. The more you become an editor, the more you know that.
Okay, another question?
All right, Mateo asks, what's the best way to get developmental feedback for an entire novel without overwhelming a critique group or beta readers? Does it work well enough to have them read a synopsis?
No,
I don't think I would.
I can do a degree of developmental editing on a synopsis. I can normally peg like if there's a really big problem, but that's even with someone who's trained as an editor. Like it doesn't work. A lot of writing groups will read things in chunks where you do like a chapter at a time, which can help. It gives you certain types of feedback. It just boils down to working things out with your writing group. I know a lot of writing groups who will just save up their novel until it's done and say, okay, can I give this to you? And can you have me feedback in like 2 months? And just be open about what you're asking for. And then if they say they can do that, then great, they can do that. And if they can't, then that's not going to work and you need to try something else.
Also, going with a critique partner setup would be really helpful, because then you're swapping each other's work. So it's tit for tat. You're kind of helping each other out at the same time that way. But I'm not sure if you should be worrying about overwhelming your beta readers, because that's kind of what, if that's what they've agreed to, because beta readers, that's sort of what you do for each other. You are reading the thing in its entirety so that you can give whole feedback that way. So yeah, that's just sort of checking with the people in your life, see if they're okay with that, what timing they can work with, things like that. I have some very fabulous beta readers in my writers group who were willing to read my 130,000 word next novel. And I was like, I am sorry. And they're like, it's okay. I have nothing else to do right now. And I was like, okay. But, checked in with them.
And I will say there are groups. I know there are groups on Facebook. There are groups on other platforms that are just like beta reading groups. And so authors are in those groups. Other people are in the groups, and authors are just saying, hey, I have this book. Here's the word count. Here's the genre. Who has time within this time frame to read it? And almost always there are people saying, oh, yep, I'll do that. So there are tons of people out there who are willing to do it. So find some of those groups, and you won't overwhelm.
Okay, do we have time for one more question if it's quick?
I don't know how quick this question is. Jocelyn asks,
Okay.
How do you know when to stop editing yourself and take on an editor? Sometimes I don't feel like I'll ever be good enough to be edited by another person.
I'll just start in and say, sweetheart, sweetheart, you precious bean. Don't worry about that so much. The whole point of an editor is that they take you wherever you are. So don't worry so much about that. Like your editor's not like looking at it and being like, Ha! Did you see this? You know, they're not there to mock you. An editor's job is to be there for you and to help empower you. So it's okay. You can do this.
Well, and maybe start with some of those less expensive and smaller types of edits, like a manuscript evaluation. Maybe start with that, because like Kaela said, it meets you where you are. You don't have to be a certain level to like be worthy of feedback. Like it's just, you might want to be at a certain level before you pay a lot of money for a lot of feedback. I agree, but like you can take smaller steps, or maybe get someone to review your first 50 pages or your first chapter. Like you can do baby steps.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we're probably out of time, but Emma, did you want to say one more thing? Sorry.
Real quick, if you're getting to the point that you like feel like you're not making progress anymore, it's time to get somebody else's eyes on it, whether that's a paid editor or a beta reader, because you could go in circles and rewrite your book a gazillion times, and maybe it will never get any better than what you were doing before if you're not moving towards something. So find someone else besides yourself to read it, so that you don't just have to sit there and spiral for forever, because you could get stuck there in an infinite loop. And don't do that to yourself.
Exactly. Oh my gosh, the death spiral. All right. Well, I think we're out of time. We're gonna get kicked off the channel. So thank you so much, you guys, for being here. You were amazing. Such great information. Find them on the channel to see what other panels are on the schedule to see what other panels they're on. These are amazing, amazing ladies, and please take full advantage of their knowledge. And thank you so much for coming to the panel today.
Thanks to our
Thank you.
wonderful panelists. You
Thanks,
guys did great.
everyone.